begin. Why don't we begin? Thank you all for coming. I am Georgia Warnke. I'm the current director of the Center for Ideas and Society, which is sponsoring this amazing book talk. It's part of our Hot Off the Presses series. This is the second in the series this year. Upcoming, in case you're interested, next week we have Toby Miller, who will be talking about his book, How Green Is Your Smartphone, with Julie and Allison. Toby Miller is a emeritus professor at UCR, and Julie and Allison is currently in the Gender and Sexuality Studies Department. And other new books coming up from Chaz faculty are Randolph Head on November 10th. At 3, we'll be interviewed by Jim Brennan on Professor Head's new book, Making Archives in Early Modern Europe. And then on Tuesday, November 17th at 4, Amanda Lucia and Michael Alexander, both in the Religious Studies Department here at UCR, will interview each other on their new books. Lucia's new book is White Utopias, the Religious Exoticism of Transformation Festivals. And Alexander's new book is Making Peace with the Universe. So mark your calendars for those, and we'll have more as the year goes on, because Chaz faculty are very productive and publish lots of books. But now I want to turn things over to Andrea Smith, whom you all know, who is a professor in the Ethnic Studies Department here at UCR. And I will now turn things over to her. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this amazing panel to discuss the new book, Otherwise Worlds Against Settler Colonialism and Anti-Blackness. And we have several of the co-editors and panelists to discuss the book and its importance for the future of Indigenous and Black studies conversations. Let me just briefly introduce everyone. We have Tiffany King, who teaches at Georgia State University and is the author of the award-winning book, Black Shoals, Offshore Formations of Black and Native Studies, a definite must-read for everyone. We also have Janelle Navarro, who is the chair of ethnic studies at Cal Poly and is the author of several articles on the intersections of hip-hop studies and indigenous feminist thought. We have Ashon Crawley, who teaches at University of Virginia and is the author of Black Pentecostal Breath, The Aesthetics of Possibility, and also the most recent book, Lonely Letters. And he was also the primary organizer of the Otherwise Worlds Conference that gave rise to the book that we are talking about today. And finally, we have Chris Finley, who teaches at USC and is the co-editor of the germinal text, Queer Indigenous Studies, and is the author of several groundbreaking essays on bringing sexy back to Native studies. So we're so pleased to have everyone here. And also we'd like to thank the Center for Ideas and Society that actually hosted the conference, Otherwise Worlds at UC Riverside several years ago, that helped bring this volume together. So to kind of start us off, we thought we'd just ask all the panelists if you could speak first about your individual contributions to the text, kind of what the interventions you were trying to make and your thoughts about the individual essays that you brought to the essay, to the volume. Maybe we could start first with Chris Finley.
Oh man. Well, what interventions that I made, or that I think the book is making?
Your particular essay.
Oh, okay. Cool, good. I'm glad I get to keep it there. You know, for me, I think that I was raised with the ethnic studies where it is kind of like Andy's written about before, like those overlapping circles of oppression that we share, that's a place where we're gonna like feel really good about, because, you know, settlers are messing everything up, white people are messing everything up, and that we're gonna like find a way to come together and like, you know, fix this. But one of the things I think is really important that I think this volume does, and what I was trying to do, is to think about the ways that we actually, that people of color, Black and Indigenous people in particular, like how we've hurt each other, right? And to think about those things and how we are possibly like hurting each other with our scholarship, with our thoughts, with our work, without meaning to, obviously, but it doesn't matter, right? Because I think it's really important to think about like different things that can now possibly get us to start talking about these real difficult moments of, anti-Blackness in Native communities. And also like, just the structure of Native nations. And that's one of the reasons why I feel such a profound debt to Black studies, is because that was the first place I ever read about, like white supremacy. Like, I didn't find Vine Deloria first, I found Malcolm X, So I've always had this profound debt there. And then, throughout the years, I think that for me, like Afro-pessimisms, Black feminisms have like completely shaped and changed all my ideas and broke them down, because in Native studies, some of these things make sense, but when you add like all these other things, these other histories, these other methods, these other ways of being, it really kind of breaks that up. Because this idea that, we're going to get to be a human and be really, and that, settlers are going to be like, genocide is a really bad idea. That's Black studies, showed me that moment is not going to happen, right? Like that can't happen. So what else can happen? So what do we want to do now? Like, what do we want, and just finding a way to like be together. I think that's like, I really love Fred Moten's work, and he talks about like, being with each other instead of trying to help each other, or, like try to like do that very colonizing thing of like thinking I know what's good for you. But really just trying to be there with each other and find out what it is that we can bring to the table, and also to critique our own ways of thinking about trying to get like a proper place in the settler nation, and start thinking like beyond that framework. So that was what I was trying to do. And I was really critiquing ethnic studies, like just the food group model of how we do things. And also, I mean, of course, the academic industrial complex, because I think that really keeps us against each other and thinking about, getting tenure, or like, being legitimate in these different fields, instead of about actually producing ideas that are critical to, having a revolution. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, can you share a little bit about your essay in the volume?
Hey fam, sorry, I had a big Black ant in my office. So I got a little bit distracted. It went away. Good, so I can't kill it. Trying to be on a higher vibration. I think the first, or I'll start with the second probably, essay that you see, which I think is the one on Black grammars of conquest, I think. What I was trying to do in that was, one, call attention to the ways that I think that white settler colonial studies enacts a lot of disavows in the ways that it talks about settler, right? Both the effective force and the political force is very different from the ways that I've heard, for instance, Hunani K. Trask talk about settlers and settler colonialism, right? Her effective force of naming Howleys as violent white supremacist settlers is very different from the kinds of admissions of settler complicity that you'll hear from a white settler studies scholar, right? And I think that I really wanted to name the kind of violence that we are able to actually see and register, particularly right now with the pandemic, and the very they are visualized like murders, extra-state murders of Black and Indigenous people right now. And so I just was thinking, the language of white settler colonialism wasn't naming violence in the ways that were appropriate and true to what we were seeing. It was doing some hedging. And I also felt that white settler colonial studies effaced some of the work that Black scholars were doing and thinking in relation to Indigenous studies. And so rather than think about Black studies as not having the vocabulary to think about Indigenous studies, which was kind of a critique of white settler studies, like we need to think Blackness within this framework. I was like, well, let's switch that. Let's think about how Black folks have been talking about genocide and slavery as a form of violence that has been structuring us, our world since the 15th century. And I thought about conquest as a kind of connective linguistic tissue, and not to give conquest all of the credit as a totalizing done project, but recognizing that that is the intent of this particular nation state and the forces that really shape life in this hemisphere. So that's one of the things that I was trying to achieve in that particular sole authored essay. And then one of the things that I wanted to do in my conversation with Frank was, one, like Chris, thank him for the framework. Like that work in in Red, White, and Black was critical in 2010 for the work that I wanted to do. That kind of comparative, analytic, and theoretical work really laid the foundation for what would be my dissertation and this book. However, we have departed ways, and that was one of the things I wanted to talk to him about. I was very anxious about some of his emerging critiques. This was probably 2016, 2017, particularly after Jared's article that came out in Critical Sociology, which appears in our book, The Veil of Slavery. So I was wondering about the extent to which he had shifted from understanding the Native positionality as half human, kind of half non-human, to this category of, well, Native people are just, you can put them in the category of folks who are not Black, right? So they can go in the category of person of color and settler. And I was really wondering what that was about and what had prompted that transition for him. And so we're getting to hear a little bit about that through his new, I guess, work of auto theory and memoir and Afro-pessimism. But it was an attempt for me to also be in an ongoing ethical engagement with another Black scholar that I didn't agree with, and also be stretched and like look at what generative conflict could do, right, and could do for our fields.
Thank you so much. Jenell, can you share a little bit about both your essay, but also the artistic work that is in the volume?
Sure, thank you, Andy, and Chris and Tiffany for your comments too. I have a couple of chapters in the book that are co-authored with my sister, Kimberly Robertson. And so I'll maybe start with the shorter of the two. So we wrote a piece on jailing in Los Angeles that's titled Mass Incarceration Since 1492. And that project was really part of a lot of our artistic endeavors. We really like to activate art as a means of disruption and resistance. And we had the opportunity in 2017 when Justice LA put out a call and they said, hey, we're gonna, have all of these jail beds available and artists can decorate them, and we're gonna drop them off at places around LA County on, Christmas Eve, as statements of resistance. And I remember vividly, we were at my cousin's house on Thanksgiving and we sat down on the couch and we were like, yeah, we're going to do this. Let's apply right now. And so we did that project, and we took a typical, metal frame bunk bed, and we adorned it in beadwork. Both of us are traditional bead artists. And so we adorned it in beadwork. We put a shawl of fringe around the bottom bunk. We hung abalone shells between the two bunks. And all of those things had particular, representations for us. We were trying to highlight and underscore the representation of our, Native kinship networks who are constantly disappeared into the prison and jail system. And particularly in a city like Los Angeles that jails more people than any other city in the world. And so we put that jail bed together, and we created a self-publication, a small zine that went with it. And on the jail bed, we had also screen printed, statistics about, our Two-Spirit relatives, our Native youth, California Indian relatives who are also, really overrepresented in the carceral system. And we dropped that jail bed off in front of the Walt Disney Concert Hall on Christmas Eve when everyone's going into their Christmas concerts. And we chose that site particularly because that was a site well into the 1850s where Tongva and Tataviam people were sold off of the slave auction block there. And so really it was a project where we wanted to highlight what, we kind of talk about in the book as radical kinship. We wanted to think about the ways in which, we are, constantly bound into these, systems of death and elimination as, Black and Indigenous people, but the ways in which we can form, better, I think, constitutive foundations of relationality that aren't based on just these histories of antagonism or, constantly assuming that we're always and already in solidarity with each other. Those two kind of extremes just, we know in our communities are not always true and or the most productive. And so that was one project that, we worked on, to kind of also bridge a lot of our scholarly endeavors with our activist work and artistic work as well. So we have a piece in the book about, that jail bed. We also, I think in that work wanted to honor, particularly one of our Native aunties, Stormy Ogden, who has, really wrote so forcefully and pointedly about Native people and incarceration. And so we were looking at, trying to dismantle some of those particular issues. Our other piece is on Beyonce, because I love Beyonce, and so does Kimberly. But that piece, we again, we're really trying to think about, well, what does it mean for us as, two Native feminists, to write about and think about, the work of Beyonce. And so we really, were in awe of the film version of Lemonade, mostly because we are also Southeastern people. Both of our ancestral homelands are in the Southeastern portions of the United States. And we really saw all of this beauty in, I think, the, otherwise relatives in that film, in terms of the grasslands that swayed and the moss that hung from the trees. And those, particular, kind of points of kinship that we wanted to kind of highlight and do kind of, if you will, close readings of. And so we tried to draw some of those things out and again, kind of give a definition for what we call radical kinship. And so I'll just close in short, maybe by reading a quick couple of lines about radical kinship. So we just say that it's a term that describes a Native feminist practice of relationality rooted in Indigenous knowledges, radical women of color, coalitional politics, and practices of decolonial futurity and transformative love. We saw it ultimately as, and still do try to activate it and see it ultimately as a form of Black and Indigenous liberation that refuses to, in Beyonce's words, rot in hell. So I'll leave it there.
Quite a way to end that. So Ashon, can you speak a little bit about your contributions, particularly since your essay really frames the volume and thinking about other wise worlds?
Thank you all for being here. This is I was telling everyone, my second Zoom of the day. The first one was earlier, and I'm a little bit tired. It's, 6:30 on the East Coast, and but I'm excited to be able to talk a little bit about Otherwise Worlds and my essay, Stayed Freedom Hallelujah. It didn't become clear to me what the essay was about, honestly, even after it's published, until I wrote a series of essays after the essay. It first appeared as sort of the opening comments for the conference that we had, Otherwise Worlds, and then it appeared as an essay in the LA Review of Books, and then it appears in the book as the first framing essay. And I did not realize, or I had a sense for what the essay was about, but I wasn't able to articulate it until I wrote a bunch of things in between that and its publication. And it has to do with the word "and," actually. And so people, some of us have been on the Zoom call saying the word "and," so Black and Indigenous, Black feminisms, Indigenous feminisms. The word "and" is the thing that I'm really interested in because I want to think about constantly the capacity for being in relation. And the thing that I wanted my essay to do was to think about how noise as a construct is a sort of racialized, gendered, and class construct that is the imposition against the capacity for being in relation. So by constituting certain kinds of practices, certain kinds of sound making, certain kinds of vibrations as noise, it's supposed to put it in the domain of the non-human. And so for me, instead of saying, well, let's try to figure out ways that we are all human and that all of us make music. What if we linger in the concept of the noise and not try to recover our capacity for humanity or for being human? And what if we just say, okay, if I'm not human, what am I? And what is my, and I mean this particularly through the epistemology that gets to make a separation between, or an attempt to categorize, there's a mosquito, that attempts to produce a categorical distinction between noise and music, between the human and the non-human, between objects and subjects, between things and objects. Like, I'm interested in what do we do when we do not submit ourselves to that particular sort of epistemological ordering of concepts. And so the essay was really an attempt to think about what happens when we think with the thing that has been called noise. What if we think of noise as generative for thinking about the constitution of our capacity for being in relation to one another? And I think it became clearer to me that I was trying to think about the word "and," because I then started publishing, I think probably 5 or 6 essays actually, that all begin with the word and they all begin with the word and they all come after this essay. And I think of them all in relation to this particular essay because what they're all trying to do is to name the capacity for being in relation is not natural, but something that you have to strive for. I think about Horton Spiller's, and I talk about this in the Lonely Letters, Horton Spiller's and the idea of the intramural as like the sort of capacity for Black folks to work with one another, to be in conversation with one another, to disagree with one another. It's what happens sort of interior to Black social life. And for me, it didn't become clear that the capacity for Black folks to be in relation isn't, it's not biological. It's not a sociological fact. It is something that you have to work to produce. You have to desire to be in relation in order to produce the capacity for being in relation. So the capacity for the intramural is something that one has to attempt as an intentional practice and project. And the essay so the essay becomes clear to me by thinking about the things that I've written after it. The essay was trying to think about how can it be possible for Black and Indigenous to practice relation that is not genetic, not biological, but a relation that has to be worked on and worked through complexity, difficulty, through the noise, through the things that we could constitute as the non-necessity, the the noisiness that gets in the way of the actual capacity for being in relation. I'm constantly trying to think about how is it that noise might be the thing that we need to focus on, because it is the thing that is the supposed throwaway, the thing that is the supposedly discardable. Can we think with that thing that others would attempt to discard in order to think about our possibility for being in relation? And so the essay is really an attempt to think about like the noise of my Black Pentecostal church upbringing. It's the attempt to think about the noise of the John Coltrane Church in Los Angeles, I'm sorry, in the Bay Area. And it's an attempt to think about the noisiness of the Pulse shooting that took place at the Pulse nightclub in Florida. And so for me, I was trying to think about the various the various ways in which noisiness is a way for us to really think about our ability for relationality, and that those of us who have been called the non-human, the beast, the abominable, through theological and philosophical and theological reflection, how is it that we actually make worlds with one another? And it is through producing otherwise than the normative. Is about producing, and worlds is plural for me intentionally, because I don't want to submit ourselves to the normative idea that there is only one world, or that there is the world, and that everything that we must do has to cohere with that specific determinate world. But instead, what I'm trying to do is think about the capacity for plurality, the capacity to produce multiple kinds of worlds in the here and now, ongoingly, as an interruption to the sort of normative production of the world. And so those are the things that the essay is trying to think about, but it didn't become clear to me, at least, until things that I'd written after that helped me reflect back on what I was trying to do in that particular essay.
Thank you so much. So now I'd like to turn to Jenell and Tiffany as co-editors of this volume. If you could maybe speak to what you see as the significance of the volume in general, or the significance you would at least like it to be, and maybe also speak to kind of your thoughts by how the volume itself got organized or framed, and what you were trying to accomplish. Tiffany, you start.
No, thank you for that. I mean, I was just going over it again today, and I was just thinking about all the folks that I had not encountered, both prior to the conference and prior to doing the work of editing and gathering and thinking with new folks, and just the particular ways that, particularly the artistic production of like Lindsay Nixon and Janelle, you and Kimberly, Chris's word in that second half on like maroon creativity. I don't want to forget anyone. Harjo, is it
Moguchi.
Okay, thank you. Harjo, that work is so beautiful on like Black metal and tattoos and that Mississippi tradition. Just folks I had never thought with before or taken the time to pause with and didn't even know were on the planet, remapped what decolonizing work could be for me. So are certainly becoming teaching guides, certainly a way to think about some of the normalizing processes that are making decolonization like a kind of keyword or buzz term, and thinking about some of the deep critical work that aesthetics can do, being in relationship with one another, being in conflict with one another can do, that this work really brings out. So that second half of the collection is stunning. And just to echo what Ashon just shared, like the levels of its impact keep kind of washing over me as I revisit it time and time again. So its meaning and the way that it swells is just a thing that I continue to be energized about and hopeful about. And I hope that people will pick it up, whatever their issues or discomfort is with the actual anthology itself and some of its hard discussions about incommensurability and identity. There's something profound going on a different kind of level, like this this book as an object resonates and is doing work with people and on people, like right now and into the future, that I'm really, really just happy about and feel joyful about. So yeah, particularly those artistic contributions from Indigenous feminists that I had not encountered before is really meaningful for me.
Can I just say, I remembered that the essay, I mixed up two essays. Gosh, this is where my mind is. Stay Freedom Hallelujah. I don't talk about John Coltrane's church or the post-nightclub shooting, but I do talk about a song that we sang at my Pentecostal church. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom, and I was trying to think about that being a practice of noisiness, that being a practice of people who are outside of the domain of the concept of the human. What do we do? How can we be together? How can we practice sort of a kind of living? And that too essay is about the word and insofar as it's really trying to think about what are the things that can allow us to have what Tiffany is talking about in terms of these difficult conversations about incommensurability. Is there a possibility for us to be in relation that is generative and that recognizes that anti-Black racism and settler colonialism need each other in their ongoing process in order to produce an occasion for the marginalization of Black folks and the marginalization of Indigenous folks? Is there a way to actually think about a freedom project that might sound like a kind of noisiness? Is there a freedom project of the and that allows us to sort of get towards something more generative? Is something that I was trying to do in that essay, which then gets transformed into another essay later with Pulse Nightclub. And yeah, so.
Thank you. Jenell, can you say kind of from your perspective, co-editing, the significance you were hoping for the book, and also maybe the approach of the book that it has so many essays that don't actually agree, like what was the rationale or the reasoning or the effect of having a space that's doesn't have kind of an easy closure on these discussions?
Sure, thanks, Andy. Well, I think I would say first, you know, I mean, the process of just even editing and putting together an anthology is this was the first time I had done that. And I was so happy to be doing it with, Andy and Tiffany. It was a very wonderful experience for me, but at the same time, it's also very hard to, kind of bring into kind of the university publishing fold the work otherwise. And yet, we had an editor at Duke that was like, yeah, we're going to need you to have.
Janelle, you're breaking up a bit.
Broke up right at the good time, too.
I know, darn it. Okay. So
that's actually not me. That's Jose. So if I turn my video off, you'll see a picture of my partner, actually.
okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
We missed the exciting conclusion.
So I think,
go ahead.
Sorry. One of the challenges for us as editors was, we wanted something otherwise. The project is about futurity and trying to pull into the present a different way of being together. And I think with kind of the confines of the academic industrial complex and its, branches of publishing, I think sometimes that was a challenge for us. We wanted originally people to just be able to move through the book how they chose to move through the book. And they could read from the end of the book to the beginning. They could start in the middle. They could open and hope. But, obviously working with an editor, they were like, yeah, you need some sections and a little bit of organization here. And so, we decided to go with kind of the theme of boundlessness. And so that's how we ended up, kind of categorizing certain sections in the book, but there's a lot of overlap between, I think, the different sections. And to your the latter part of your question, Andy, we weren't looking for authors' works that we all just thought we all agree with these works. These are, in line with the way we're thinking about these things. We do feel like, moving into an otherwise stance will require some messiness. And that's fine. We were fine with that. We're still fine with that. We really liked the idea that Jared had put forward at the Otherwise Worlds conference, that we cannot wait for, this, perfect moment that will never arrive, where everyone in Native studies knows everything about Black studies and everyone in Black studies knows everything about Native studies. That will just be a kind of forever delayed project. So instead, Jared had, posited this idea of, we should just be able to come together and work in kind of an amateur reading positionality and be
You keep getting cut off in the statement. But now you're still breaking up.
Sorry, y'all. Maybe I should try logging on with my phone.
Okay. So we'll switch to logging off, and then we'll transition to Chris, if you can maybe say your thoughts on what you see as the significance of the project overall.
I think everybody's kind of already said it so beautifully. Yeah, I think it's just about, being with the difficulties of this work and trying to find, for me, I think one of the guiding stars is often of queer of color, scholarship and theory and ideas, and, like just trying to think and like wanting and imagining a new future that includes Black and Indigenous people. Like, I mean, that already is like kind of a radical conception. And I think that so many of the essays really provide a map to, finding that. And, but I really like your ideas of boundlessness too, that we're talking about here. And, I think for me, even just being at the conference was like, that was a practice, right? Because I'm like, what the hell is everybody talking about? Which was really, which was good, because I had kind of thought that it was going to be like, very complimentary. I don't know what I thought, but then to find, no, this is actually this is very difficult work, and that people were upfront about that, and I think that, but they had the courage to come and talk about these things that usually we don't like to air, so I think that just it opens a conversation that I think is really important, and who knows where it'll lead. But I do not think it was a coincidence that the book came out in June 2020. It was a very perfect moment for it. So I'm very excited just to be a part of it. And I'm so grateful for the labor of the editors and all of the contributors who put this together, because we need it. So thanks.
And Ashon, could you speak a little bit about, well, since you kind of organized the conference from which this began, your thinking of why have this conversation, as well as what you see as the contribution of the work or the future of it?
Yeah, Andy, you are underselling yourself. You were a co-organizer. You've really helped out a lot with it. It wasn't just me. I couldn't have done that. I think it was my first year at UCR. I could not have done that on my own at all. So thank you too. I think that the one of the reasons why I talk about song so much and Black songs so much in my own work, and one of the reasons why I talked about the song "Woke Up This Morning with My Mind Stayed on Freedom" in my work. And I think that it is what the contribution is also, so like thinking about the artwork that is also included in the volume. I think that, you know, it's difficult work, yes, but there's like also joy, and like there's a way that joy gets short shrift for a lot of people, or joy is considered by some people to be like the easy stuff, the easy recourse, that somehow Black joy is like this frivolous thing that is easy to access and you could just do it. And if you have joy during sorrow, that you kind of don't know how terrible things are, you couldn't actually recognize the severity of the situation in which we exist if you attempt something like joy in the midst of anti-Black violence, or if you attempt joy in the midst of settler colonial violence. And so for me, one of the things that I wanted to do in my own piece, and I think one of the interventions of the book itself, is that it is the attempt to think about difficulty, but it is also the attempt to think about what is it that we have that we want to cultivate, that we don't want to relinquish, that we don't want to give up. And one of the things that we have that we don't want to relinquish, it seems to me, is our capacity to be critical, the capacity for critical work to be joyful, that it doesn't, like there is no, it seems to me, like, you know, I teach in religious studies here at, where am I? UVA, that's, I almost said UCR. I teach in religious studies here, and so I'm teaching a lot of courses at this current moment that really tries to really interrogate the distinction between the so-called sacred and the so-called secular. The idea that there's a holy and an unholy, and that those things are categorically distinct and that they can be separable. I think that the same is true for the ways we think about joy, that we have to really think about the capacity for having joy in the midst of and against the normative world and its attempts to make us not have joy. Joy for me is like a resource. Joy for me is the capacity to keep going in the midst of suffering and violence. And so for me, I think one of the things that the piece does is, that the book does, is by having disagreement that is open and incomplete, is that it invites conversation. It invites people to engage. It invites a certain kind of, because it is open, it is invitational. It is a practice of welcome, insofar as what it's saying is that we haven't settled any of these ideas, these concepts, these conversations, but they are unsettled and they are unsettling. How can we find something of ourselves in the practice of that unsettlement is, I think, what the book allows us to at least think about with the different kinds of voices. I was very much like, I don't think we should be amateurish in our sort of relations to Black and Indigenous studies. I think that we should, like we tell our grad students, have fidelity to the things that we're trying to discuss, and like not say that we're masters of any knowledge, because that would be reproducing the logic, but certainly like also not presuming that we can just say anything that we want to say under the guise. So for me, like that's a kind of openness that I'm constantly trying to think about, because I'm like unsettled by the idea of a kind of amateurishness, because I feel like I don't want to just say anything under the guise of a certain kind of sort of amateurish relation to things. And I think that that is an openness that invites us to actually think with one another. It allows me to think with Jared. It allows me to think with you all. And so I think that that is one of the gifts that Otherwise World gives us. It doesn't give us agreement as simple. It gives us the fact that we are complex, and that complexity is textured, and that texture means that sometimes there's going to be agitation, and we can still make something through and with and against agitation and texture. And so that's what I think the book allows us to at least do and to think about with one another.
Thank you so much. And before I go on, I wanted to see, did anyone have any thoughts from what somebody else said? Did any?
Yeah, I wanted to also pick up Samana Thompson's work. I'm showing a bit of their graphic work and the zine work, which I'm excited to do, particularly to be able to, shifting modalities with my students, like really dream and plot and render visually Black and Indigenous futures. Like this is just a really important teaching text right now. We've had to shift radically the ways that we relate to one another, often mediated by cloth and not being able to touch. So the ways, right, the struggles through not knowing enough, right? The the desire to be faithful and have a certain kind of fidelity and rigor is something that I think this book demands. And it's definitely making me shift in my own method of interrogation and thinking with both fields. So yeah, beautiful work.
Chris, I don't know if you'd like to add into that, particularly thinking of like the Indigenous Comic-Con and kind of alternative ways of engaging this work.
Yeah, Andy, I was going to add to what Tiffany was sharing, just in terms of, teaching modalities and, learning collectively. I mean, I think, a lot of the artwork in the book really shows us that you can do a lot with little. Samantha Thompson's zine work is so phenomenal. And, for a lot of Black and Indigenous zinesters, I mean, it's, you sit down at your own kitchen table and really all you need to, kind of pull something into, kind of beauty is like some paper and a glue stick and all the images that you will create a dialogue with, a visual kind of dialogue with. And so I think there's that, kind of just, for me, it's much of the book, and the real promise and beauty of the book is the conjuring that's therein, the alchemy that's present in the written text and the visual texts, the imaginative, kind of scope of the book, and those types of things. I think a little bit too, about, in the introduction, we had talked about how, it seems for too long, the antagonisms, between, Black and Native folks have led us to constantly try to vie for some special status. And one of the things we mentioned in the introduction was, we all do just normal quotidian things. Yeah, as, a Southeastern Native person, I might, do a stomp dance, but I also just go to the grocery store. And so none of us really need to necessarily have some special status to deserve liberation. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that I continue to go back to and return to in this book, that just the creative and imaginative scale provides us with some pathways to otherwiseness that, again, I love, Ashon, I love this notion of the invitational, right? It's an invitation to become more imaginative in the ways in which we can relate with each other. So.
And Chris?
Well, I mean, Andy and I have had the great joy of going to Indigenous Comic-Con, or what are we supposed to call it now, since Comic-Con came and like sued Indigenous comics. Yeah, they couldn't let us. Yeah, so they wouldn't let us have it. But it was really cool because my realm is kind of like film and stuff, and obviously, theory, all the things we do here. But, like, I write and think about like, this other kind of image that, I would like to see of Indigenous people, or the way that we could think about ourselves, or any of this kind of stuff. And then we go to Indigenous Comic-Con, and that's already happening there. It's already on, it was so exciting to see that. And, since I live in LA, with the celebrity stuff, I mean, I love celebrities, I'm not opposed to them, but thinking about like even the movie stars that were there, nobody cared. Like, they just hung out with the regular people. They didn't have like a handler like they do in LA, because everybody was just like there, and people were like wanting to help each other and mentor each other, and it was just totally different vibe than the Academy, right? And I was like, this is one of the best conferences I've ever been to, because I feel that joy, right? I feel like excited by what's happening right now, and thrilled by that. And I also taught Argon Star's Super Indian, and I just think it's such a great, comic to be like, dude, Indians aren't dead. This is like a kind of a little brush of, reservation life or whatever. that, you know, is very different from all these other things you're going to hear, you know, Native people be represented as. And I really like what people were saying about that complexity. I think we never get to have complexity. So, yeah.
Change the background to go with the otherwise future shenanigans. But yeah, the conference, we had the same discussion on solar colonialism and anti-Blackness, but it was through space aliens. And then you just somehow end up in a different space and different possibilities out there. So anyway, we're getting near to the end of our time, but I did want everyone to have a chance to have kind of a last word. If there's any thoughts you had from the conversation you wanted to mention, and if not, maybe just closing out with what is the future or futures you imagine for the conversations between Black and Indigenous studies. Anybody like to start?
I'm really excited for the new work that's coming out in Black ecologies, because I've always wondered about Black people's kind of language and vernaculars around land and non-human life, right? And thinking about where that comes up, right? And again, having to refocus and maybe not put as much attention on when Black people speak, articulate, write land, but perhaps when they dance it, versus when they breathe it. And I was prompted to think about this, particularly from my colleague Xerxes Mendez, who thinks about like Black embodiment and some of the ritual and ceremony and dance of Santeria, so a Yemaya dance. And so again, me struggling with only the realm of language, like not really necessarily seeing it orthographically in Black studies, but thinking about it at the level of the body, and also being able to hear how it's coming up in some of these new, richly and deeply detailed, effective accounts of Black ecologies is something where I think Black and Native studies are going to link up again and do something really amazing. So that's what I'm looking towards and really hopeful about, right? How we language embody and do, and perhaps develop a language for land at the ceremony space, at the smoky space, at the imaginative space. So that's it.
Jenell?
Yeah, I think maybe one of the things that I'm excited about too is to continue to see, I know there are a lot of new works, you know, coming out on Black and Native futurity, thinking about Andrew Jolivet's, you know, upcoming book, some things like that. That work is just really exciting to me. I think, you know, for, you know, kind of imagining what the living, the non-living, the once living, the soon to be living, how all of those relatives are at once part of the conversation when we actually start to frame things through futurisms. And again, I think there's a lot, you know, to be said about the visual texts, the sonic texts that are in, you know, the fields of Black and Native futurities as well, that we haven't really, you know, seen so much in the past. And so I think there's just, I don't know, that wealth of just deep and rich, you know, thinking is really exciting to me to see, you know, where things will go. You know, out of this book, I developed a new course on Black and Native futurity. It's called Black and Native Futurity: Theories of Hope. And I'll be teaching that for the first time in the winter quarter. And I'm just really excited to have these conversations with, you know, students and in more of a collective space. And to, you know, have, I think, you know, a text that does drive us towards, you know, considerations of joy. And that, again, those aren't the easy cop-outs, you know, they're absolutely, I think, necessary to all our, living and non-living relations. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at.
Chris?
I'm really excited about Black and Native feminisms, and I've just been really excited about the work, like of Sadia Hartman's new book, Wayward Lives, and Kara Keeling's work. It's just like I just feel like there are actually some really exciting things happening, and it's really, and I don't know where those are going to go, so, and I think I like that actually. So the direction, a new direction though, something else. So.
And Ashon?
I'm looking forward to what everyone said. I'm looking forward to the conversations that will emerge, or the conversations that will continue to unfold, because they've already emerged. And so really just, thinking with folks, letting them engage the work, critique the work, take it further, tell us where to step back. I'm looking forward to the ways conversations will unfold from this set of conversations that has been staged, and what other conversations will come because of the conversation that this one is sort of engaging.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thanks so much to Chris, Tiffany, Jenell, and Ashon, and also to the Center for Ideas in Society for not only hosting this, but hosting the conference from which this all began. Buy your book, which you can't see with this, but anyway, Otherwise Worlds, and also just FYI, all the proceeds from this book, thank you, all the proceeds from this book go to fund Lifted Voices, which is a grassroots organizing formation in Chicago that centers on the intersections of Black and Indigenous struggles. So all the funding goes to support their very important efforts. So thank you all for joining, and have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.